Welcome to First Strike here on VSiN. I'm your host, Dave Ross. For the next hour, going to break down UFC Fight Night coming up this Saturday night, a middleweight clash between Brendan Allen and Paul Craig. Big favorite here in Brendan Allen. We'll get to that and maybe some pathways to victory for both. But before we look ahead, let's look back at what we saw at UFC 295. Exhale. 2 title bouts on the line at Madison Square Garden. There he is, Alex Pereira, now a 2-division champ after knocking out Yuri Prochazka via TKO in round number 2. Maybe a fight he was losing up until that point, but that power that Poatan has is devastating, and he knocks out Yuri Prochazka to claim that strap. In the co-main event, we have a new interim heavyweight champion of the world. His name is Tom Aspinall from England, as he walks through Sergey Pavlovich in round number 1 with the KO there. So 2 new title contenders and champions now on the scene at both light heavyweight and heavyweight. Without further ado, let's bring in the man you can follow on X as I do, at GamLou. He is the one and only Lou Finocchiaro, the host of the About Business podcast. Lou, I was admittedly on the wrong side, but I was thrilled nonetheless to see what we saw in the co-main in the main event. What is your takeaway from an absolutely wild night at Madison Square Garden?
First, Dave, thanks for having me on. I sidestepped both of those fights. I did get Pereira Prochazka to start 2. I had Aspinall Pavlovich to start round 2. I thought Pavlovich could make it at least that far. For him to be done that way, like Overeem did to him in his debut against a guy in Aspinall with a strained back, we've come to learn, it really drops Pavlovich a few notches in my book. It takes nothing away from Aspinall, who unfortunately has no shot at getting Stipe or John Jones. And we're just going to have to see how they dole the whole thing out. But overall, New York City, what a great card, top to bottom. And now we go from having some shine on a big card to going to a card with less name recognition, 5 debuting fighters. But this card is deep and rife in betting opportunity.
And Lou, that's exactly the point here, because you have a star-studded event like UFC 295, and then you kind of exhale, and then you have this card, and you go, oh, well, this isn't going to draw the attention. This is what draws people like you and gets your attention, because as you mentioned, you sidestepped the co-main and the main last week because you have better betting opportunities this week. Let's get to that main event here in this one, because you do look at Brendan Allen, you can understand why he's such a big favorite here over Paul Craig. But what's interesting is if the fight gets to the ground, is where Paul Craig, obviously we know, can be dangerous here. Is it as simple as that, in your estimation, that if Brendan Allen keeps this fight standing, he should be almost, over $4 betting favorite as we have here on a Tuesday?
Dave, I don't think Brendan Allen should be over a $4 favorite in this fight in any way, shape, or form. I don't believe his striking is enough to expose Craig. Let's not forget, Craig fought at 205. He's 2 inches taller. He's going to have a reach advantage. When the night of the fight occurs, Craig's going to be much the larger, heavier man in this fight. And we've seen, as lacking as Craig is in stand-up, it's evolving. And as lacking as Allen is in IQ, he's been able to masquerade it over the last few fights. Allen is not going to be able to hold himself back from trying to beat Craig at his own game. If he follows the plan, and that said plan will be tire Craig out a little bit, get him desperate on the feet, then take him down to do it, I believe that's Allen's plan. I believe he has the ability to execute that plan. But you're dealing with a guy with some shaky IQ and a guy in Craig that is massive next to Allen, and you got to give him his respect, I think, even though he's so singularly dimensioned.
And that is fascinating, that really for Paul Craig, and I love the way you phrased it, it's not a strength by any stretch of the imagination, the hands game, right? And we've seen this before, like Damian Maia comes to mind, where you have a specialist, right? Like Kron Gracie still has not learned how to use his hands at all. Paul Craig has. So I look at the total here, and it's set right now at a round and a half. Remember, 5-round here, main event. And basically minus $1.10 for a round and a half. Can Paul Craig survive enough to make this over playable in your mind?
That 1.5 with a pick to the, to the under over indicates a submission by Craig to me.
Ooh.
That's how I read this. Again, I may be flawed in how I'm approaching Allen's approach to this fight, but Allen has to take this. If Allen goes, all to the wall, for lack of a better term, then I don't think this is the way he wins. I think he runs right into a submission when he's dry and giving Craig every chance he has to win the fight. No, I think the Allen side has taking this fight into a couple rounds on their side. I've been wrong before, plenty wrong. I could be wrong here. But I think that I really like the over looking at that total.
As do I. I got at first glance here, and these lines get populated, which is why I love when we do the show. So we try to get those to you kind of hot off the press, if you will. And what's fascinating to me, too, Lou, is you look at just, if you want to just take Paul Craig as a dog at plus 330, you can do that. The submission price is not that much higher, 5-1. Is that the only pathway that we possibly see? I mean, you could get a bizarre club and sub if somehow he hurts Brendan Allen on the ground or he gets him in a compromising position. That's 9-1. But if you're on the Craig side, do you take the added value of the 5-1 sub price?
Yeah, I think there's enough price difference to make it worthwhile. I also believe it's the most and singular logical path for Craig to earn victory is to jeopardize Allen on a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll be an IQ mistake for Allen if he makes one.
That's a great way to phrase it right there. If he makes a mistake, it'll be one that Craig's going to look to take advantage of, certainly in a submission type scenario there. So probably playable in Lou and I's, both of our eyes here at 5-1. I want to get to a couple fights that are intriguing to me for a couple different reasons. One, you've got the youngster in Chase Hooper back in there against the Monkey King in Jordan Levitt. And right now you're seeing Chase as a solid 225 betting favorite against Levitt. And, Levitt they're both kind of comical in their own way. I've seen them on social media this week. And you got a young kid in here at 24, but it's not like Jordan's that much older at 28. He can be one of those unorthodox type fighters against a guy in Chase who's starting to round out his MMA game. Well, what do you make of this matchup here on the main card?
I'm glad you picked this one, Dave, and I'm going to try and remain monotone here because I believe this fight is mispriced. I look at Levitt as a man. He doesn't act that way. He's goofy and geeky, but he's married. He has a family, and he has goals. And his goals include staying in the UFC. If he loses this fight, he's out. Chase has done very well, but he's a gangly young kid, and he's actually showed even better since he went to 55 from 145, but he's not ready yet for a 28-year-old man in Levitt that's desperate, that needs to stay. This fight's mispriced. I like Levitt as an underdog.
Yeah, I think you got some live dogs that are barking here. The co-main event, you got Jake Matthews from Australia in there, solid underdog. Right here, we're seeing at plus 230 against Michael Morales. Is this a potential spot where another dog could be barking?
Yeah, no question about it. This one, the story is the experience and inconsistency on the Matthews side against a guy in Morales that's looked great, but he hasn't been in with near the ilk that has competed against Matthews, albeit Matthews has had uneven results, but he comes in ready to bounce again off a loss. And I think Matthews is dangerous. Do I look at Matthews as a potential bet on? I'm not sure if I'm that far at this point in the week, but what you're showing now, total rounds over 1.5, minus 185. I'll be looking at that over, starts round 3 even. That kind of a prop here because I don't believe the young kid's going to get Matthews out of there.
And you see there, Lou, without picking a winner, that this fight just hits the cards, plus $1.60. And I know you're looking at to begin round 3. Is that something kind of in an elevator, if you will, we call it these days? If you have the fight to go over 1.5, then maybe to start round 2 or start round 3 rather. Would you look at that as another playable piece here, plus $1.60 that the fight hits the cards?
Dave, I'm starting to get nervous that you're anticipating how I look at these fights correctly. But that's exactly right. If I like that over 1.5, my next challenge is how do I get rid of minus 185? And so I have to take it up. That's exactly how I would approach it.
I always say that I feel better when what I'm thinking matches what our experts think on the show. So you're already making me feel better about this fight card, Lou. I want to get into a couple things here. We've got about a minute to go. Tell the people about the sneak peek this week that you've already given out and what they get on the Bout Business podcast.
The sneak peek is simply a Monday look at the opening lines. And really, it's a great practice for me to sharpen my steel. And it's a great way to really, I'm reading lines that early in the week. And on some of those debuting fighters, one of the debuters has gone from dog to favorite. 3 of them have gotten bet out of their minds. And then in one of the debuting fights, the debuter is a 500 or 600 favorite.
Ooh.
The young man Talbot. So I'll be watching those. I think in those 3 fights with the debuters, you might find some information on the sneak peek regarding those fights.
And that is why you got to check out the Bout Business podcast. Lou Finocchiaro, always appreciate you, my friend. Enjoy the fights. We'll catch up again. We're going to take a break for the UFC next week. So it'll be the week after that when we see Lou back here on the program. Don't go anywhere. Much more to get to. Just getting it started right here. It is First Strike on VSiN. Before you make your next wager, be sure to visit VSiN.com. Check the current betting splits data. Want to know where the money and bets are moving for every single game? Well, the betting splits page is updated with DraftKings odds every 5 minutes. You can see the changes in all the action. Find out where the public is betting based on the number of tickets and where the money doesn't match the public opinion. You can check out not just today's action, but future events as well. Betting splits are another way VSiN is here to make you a smarter, better year-round. Check out today's betting splits for every game at VSiN.com. It's time to ship up to Boston to catch up with our guy, Dan Vreeland. You can follow him on X, as I do, at Gumby Vreeland, and he's all over the MMA space. Dan, tell the peeps where they can find you on so many different outlets.
You can find me writing at both the sportsgamblingpodcast.com and Cage Side Press, which is where I do most of my MMA writing. And then you can also hear me on podcasts in both those places, the SGPN MMA podcast and the Top Turtle MMA podcast on Cage Side Press, where I interview a few of these fighters on this card this week.
Oh, I love that. Before I get to that and pick up what you've been able to glean from the fighters in action this week, we always love to ask you the fight you can't wait to wager on and the fight you can't wait to watch.
The fight I can't wait to watch is easy. It's Jonathan Pierce versus Joe Anderson Brito. I've always been a big fan of Jonathan Pierce. I think his size is really intriguing in this weight class. I think the speed of Joe Anderson Brito is like an interesting challenge that he's never dealt with. So I'm seeing a close line. I think it makes a lot of sense. These two are both dangerous in very different ways. So I'm just looking forward to seeing how that one plays out. The one I'm hoping to wager on, and the one I'm the most excited to wager on, is one that's probably not even on your board yet.
Oh.
Christian Leroy Duncan was supposed to fight Cesar Almeida, and I've got a little bit of insider information. Almeida out of that fight with an infection. Insert welterweight from the regional scene, Motebek Oralbai, who is a little-known guy out of LFA, who is an absolute beast of a wrestler. I'm guessing because he's coming in here on short notice, and at least I'm being told he's going to come in here as a very steep price, and I think he's going to wrestle Leroy Duncan to death. So look for that guy as soon as he comes on the board.
That is not on the board, but that is breaking news here from Dan Vreeland. Wow, I'm going to be watching that for maybe fading Christian Leroy Duncan here with that news of Gumby Vreeland. So we'll wait until see what those numbers get populated as the week goes on. But that is not on the board just yet. So literally fresh off the presses from Boston. Okay, let's get to this main event here because, again, after UFC 295, sometimes we go, this card. I am intrigued by the main event. Right, because you look at Brendan Allen, this is a guy in the middleweight division, and we talked to Lou Finocchiaro in the last segment. Maybe if he can stay on schedule and stay disciplined, you can understand why he's over a $4 betting favorite. But Paul Craig is a guy you don't want to mess with. If the fight hits the ground, he's going to look for unorthodox submissions. Should Allen be this big a favorite to you, Dan? What do you think?
No, not at all. And both because of the thing you just pointed out, with him sometimes making a bad decision and going somewhere he shouldn't. And two, we've only really seen Paul Craig at this weight class one time, right?
Hmm.
And in that one time, his wrestling seems to be playing up quite a bit, right? Because that was the knock on him at light heavyweight. He's not a big enough guy, not with good enough wrestling to be taking down these bigger light heavyweight dudes. Drop him down a weight class, and suddenly his size plays up, his wrestling plays up. Will it play up against Brendan Allen that much? I'm not sure. Brendan Allen's a good grappler, but that much to be, over a 3-1 underdog here, that price is wacky as all can be. I think Paul Craig is the only possible bet you can have here with value, and that includes all the props on Brendan Allen. This is a dog or a pass spot for me.
And again, if you're looking at Craig's pathways to victory, is it sub and sub only? Because that's 5-1 instead of the plus 330. Or do you think, I mean, dare I say, could he get a ground and pound if the fight hits the ground and gets him in a unorthodox position? 9-1 if you think he could do that. But it's got to be on the ground in some capacity, right?
I would think it's got to be on the ground. I would say you're not getting enough extra value on the submission prop to play it here with Paul Craig. And I'll just be honest. I remember being burned by Paul Craig versus Shogun Rua.
Uh-huh.
He ground and pounded out Shogun Rua, and I was like, there was no way KO Shogun Rua from Paul Craig was going to happen, and then it did. So unless I'm getting a big enough bump in the odds there, I don't like Paul Craig in any particular method because he's already such a value here on the money line.
Yeah, I'm with you. We've seen some weird things in main events recently, and certainly one comes to mind, Jailton Almeida not being able to finish Derek Lewis, but I'm going to try to let that go. Okay, you mentioned, and Britton Hess, who does a great job putting together these shows, he wrote on the rundown, with a fight card featuring so many debutantes. Like, we don't use debutantes in the English language very often, but there are a bunch of newcomers on this fight card. You've spoken to some of them this week. Tell me maybe a fighter you've spoken to this week that is maybe basically on what they said to you, maybe gives you a little bit of either pause or green light go on their fight this week.
I talked to Jose Johnson this week, and I can't believe how much he boosted my feelings about him fighting Chad Anheliger. And the reason was really simple. I talked to him about, said, hey, you've had a really long layoff and a couple of canceled fights. What's going on? Why you've been out for that long? And he said, I'll be honest with you. I had a surgery that I've been waiting for a really long time, and it cleared some things up. And I said, knee, shoulder. He said eyeballs. Oh. He has basically been legally blind since he was born, and he has been fighting what he said was blurry figures. And he's been knocking dudes out on the regional scene, basically boxing without being able to see his opponent. Now he's got 20/20 vision, and he's sniping people at the gym. Just going from being damn near legally blind to having 20/20 vision is enough of a huge uptick for him. And for me, I already liked his wrestling improvements that we saw in Contender Series. Now, granted, the short notice fight against Damon Blackshear didn't show that, but a guy who can now box and see, which he hasn't been able to do before, that to me gives me a lot more credibility, or a lot more of a pop on that number.
He's minus 185 right now. A guy who can box and now see is quite the line, Dan. And look, he brings back Bloodsport. If everybody in MMA probably has watched that movie at some point. But a blinded fight, I mean, it's tough to fight these high-level guys when you don't have your eyesight. That is fascinating to me, and it's the one thing you can glean from actually talking to fighters, as you have this week, to know that he's gotten that corrective surgery. So seems very playable at a small price tag here, under $2. Any other fighter this week that you spoke to that really, maybe one way or another, gave you something to think about?
So nobody else I spoke to, but I will say I went back and did some research on Rafael Estevam, who a lot of people might not remember, because, we get these Contender Series guys who've been on the Contender Series and we get all jacked up about, and then, they have a fight or two or have a long layoff and we kind of forget about him. Everybody's excited about Peyton Talbot this weekend because he's recent, he's fresh on our mind. Rafael Estevam won his contract in 2022 on Contender Series, and since then has been out for various different reasons. And he's going to get a debut fight against Charles Johnson, and I think a lot of people will see that. Charles Johnson, a wily veteran. Would you want to bet a guy coming off of a year-long layoff, at favorite money against Charles Johnson? But if you go back and you watch that fight that he had on Contender Series, the guy is so crafty on the ground and he's so smart on the ground. He's got good double leg takedowns. And really, when you think about the biggest weakness of Charles Johnson, that's it. It's his wrestling, right? We saw it in that Cody Durden fight. Cody Durden just ragdolled him to the mat over and over and over and over again. And with Estavia, having that long layoff, I think is making the price a little bit shorter. And I think for that reason alone, I think you got to get in on him at this light price.
Yeah, it's amazing because Charles Johnson right now plus $1.14, and I'm sure it's going to be a popular dog side here. But I'm picking up what you're putting down. Very smart that you're getting a small price tag here in the favorite just because he's been out of action and maybe out of people's minds, if you will, in the fight game here. You mentioned Peyton Talbot. He's the biggest favorite on the card at minus 850 against Nick Aguirre. I can't play $8, $9 favorites anymore after getting burned by Valentina Shevchenko against Alexa Grasso the first time out. Well, what do we make here of Talbot, a young fighter here, now down to $6, so maybe a little bit better value here, but against another young fighter, Nick Aguirre.
I actually think you might look for specific round props to make this interesting. And I know you usually don't see those until a little bit later in the week, or they don't start to, pop up all the places. But the reason I like later round props for this one is that Peyton Talbot is a guy who likes to be crafty in there, who likes to show off a little bit. I think he is going to go for the kill, and Nick Aguirre has shown that maybe he's not the most durable guy on the whole planet. But I think as this fight goes on, you're going to start to see Peyton Talbot move more and more towards that finish because he's going to want that finish. He's going to want that stamp on his UFC debut. So I think if you look for him in like a third round KO prop, you're going to find a much more manageable number, a number that's a little bit more interesting. Because, looking at it right now, it's on your screen. Just looking at that KO prop, maybe not the most enticing thing in the whole world, to get just one type of potential finish. I think he is going to win by TKO, but to make it a little juicier, I like late in the fight.
Wow. Okay. So minus 210 if you just want it overall, but look for maybe a late round prop there, second round or third round KO to get a better price tag there. I look at Amanda Ribas. I've been on her side a couple of times, haven't cashed all those tickets. She's back in now against Luliana Pinheiro. She's about a 250 betting favorite here. Is there any concern now for Amanda kind of dropping? I don't want to say dropping down in competition, but when you kind of get to that mountaintop, don't get there, and then you got to pick up the pieces again, and you're weighing 250. Does that give you a little pause?
She's giving me a little pause. I didn't like what I saw in the Macy Barber fight. Right. It concerned me quite a bit. That she just kind of got bodied up and put down really easily, it seemed like. So I am worried about those things with Ribas, but I will say this. The thing that gives me a little bit more faith in this fight is Luana Pinheiro is somebody who has had trouble with people with physicality. She had trouble with Michelle Waterson's takedowns. Ribas should have no problem.
Dan, we look forward to it each and every week, my friend. Always great to catch up with you, and we will catch up with you when the UFC comes back after the Thanksgiving holiday. There he is, everybody. Give him a follow at Gumby Vreeland. Come on back. Just getting started right here. First Strike on VSiN. With so many games on the board, there's no better time to put the VSiN experts to work for you. Become a VSiN Pro subscriber today. Get access to our daily best bets with a leaderboard to see which VSiN expert has the current hot hand. Betting splits to show you where the money and bets are moving for every single game. Plus, betting systems, premium analysis, and 24/7 video access. Sign up today. Get your first 30 days for only $19 to see everything VSiN has to help up your betting game. Visit VSiN.com/subscribe and sign up now. We are heading to the second city to catch up with our guy, Jordan Sherwood. You can follow him on X, as I do, at Wood on ESPN 1000. He is also the host of the Unnamed MMA podcast. And Jordan, before we get into this card this week, I do want to look back with you at last week's chaos of UFC 295. What's your biggest takeaway now that we have a new interim heavyweight champion and we have a new light heavyweight champion of the world?
Well, I think personally I should have been smarter in my handicapping of Tom Aspinall. I'm just reflecting back of, this was a guy that was pegged to be a future heavyweight champion. And despite, the injury and despite the circumstances of a short notice fight, I should have noticed at the end of the day, you got Sergey Pavlovich that has leaky defense from a striking standpoint. Curtis Blades was tagging him in the previous fight, and Aspinall was going to find the opening. So I missed that, but now I look forward, like, what's next for Tom Aspinall? Like, is he going to just wait around for Stipe and John Jones to do their thing, likely next summer, or are we going to, smarten up and get Tom Aspinall a fight sooner rather than later? Because look, UFC 300 is right around the corner, and although we want Conor McGregor on the card, we don't want Conor McGregor headlining the card, do we? We want a title fight headlining that card.
Oh, what an interesting question you pose. Should Conor McGregor still be a headliner at UFC 300? That is a bizarre theory since we haven't seen him fight in forever. I'm with you on the Aspinall thing. I was on the wrong side, too, on Pavlovich. I was concerned about the no working. His back was out. We didn't even know that before the fight, but we knew he didn't even have a camp. And yet to roll through Sergey Pavlovich like that, it is different level stuff. I wonder if Jailton Almeida could be next. That would be interesting to me to see if you put that kind of overblown light heavyweight against a real heavyweight here in Tom Aspinall. Fascinating potential matchmaking to come. Let's get to this week's card in the main event here. And do you like this matchmaking of Paul Craig, a guy who he's becoming more well-rounded, but we know he's got big-time deficiencies if the fight stays standing, against a guy like Brendan Allen who feels like he can do everything, but sometimes maybe mentally makes mistakes inside the octagon. Should Brendan Allen be over a $4 betting favorite?
I don't think so. Yes, Brendan Allen is extremely well-rounded. He's obviously going to have a decisive advantage on the feet. And look, he's only been submitted one time in his mixed martial arts career. And surprisingly, it was against Trevon Giles, way back when, or early on in his career. And he's been in there with some very good grapplers. I think the intriguing thing is, how good is Paul Craig at 185? He looked good in his debut. He shocked a lot of people with his ability to submit Munoz, a guy that Brendan Allen also, has a victory over. So are you trusting Brendan Allen to do what he should do in this fight, push the pace, look to score on the stand-up, and not make the mental mistake of going into Paul Craig's guard? We've seen that happen before, and we know what Paul Craig, the Bear Jew, can do. So I think, look, the way to handicap this is certainly not Brendan Allen at that $4 favorite. I think you've got to look at either guy, both fighters, being finishers. Paul Craig is lethal with his submissions and can find opportunities there. And quite frankly, Brendan Allen, I think, could finish Paul Craig either via submission or all likelihood with strikes, via the TKO on the feet or ground and pound. So my methodology, at least early on this fight week, is look for the under. Look for the under to cash, knowing it's a 5-round fight, that there's plenty of time and opportunity to do so, because I still think there's question marks about Paul Craig and what he could do at 185.
There it is, the under right now. Not too much juice, just $1.20 for under a round and a half, so 7.5 minutes there in this potential 5-round main event. You mentioned Craig with the finishing potential. TKO or DQ is 9-1. The sub is 5-1. We never thought Almeida and Derek Lewis would go the distance. The fight just to go the distance here is 5-1, plus 500. I mean, we're not going to get another crazy night like we had a couple weeks ago, are we?
No, I don't think so. I think that had to do with the fact that the two fighters matching up. Almeida, just as we were just alluding to, undersized heavyweight, not able to get the submission that he did. And once he had control, firm grasp of the fight, he was just, happy enough to remain in the guard of Derek Lewis and control him. That's not going to be the case. Paul Craig, too active of a guard to fall into that trap. And Allen is an all-action type of fighter. So I suspect certainly the unders to play.
All right, so minus $1.20 there. In the co-main event, you got Michael Morales, undefeated prospect, not a prospect anymore when you're in the co-main event of a UFC card against Jake Matthews, a guy who can be perplexing at times, but we do know obviously he's got real ability too at 29 years young against the 24-year-old Morales. Is this too much too soon for Morales, or the right next opponent in his evolution?
No, look, I think Morales' victory over Griffin is in his previous fight is right there. Jake Matthews is a guy that's been around the UFC for quite some time, a stalwart of the welterweight division, wins and losses. He's actually rotated wins and losses, so if pattern holds up, he's due for an L on Saturday. And I think Morales is showcased. He's skilled everywhere. He's good on his feet, very athletic, and obviously well-versed on the ground. I just think that Jake Matthews, is that type of opponent similar to Griffin, where he's going to challenge Morales, and Morales is not going to have the ability to go out and finish the fight. I think Morales takes his foot off the gas pedal, just scores, it controls with grappling and submission attempts. But I think really Morales at a $2 plus favorite, I understand it, but I think I'm looking for value there. So Morales via decision. I think this fight's going to the judges' scorecards. I think Morales is going to be content to continue to improve, evolve, and get probably the biggest name on his resume in the W column.
Love what you've done there. So you're going to turn a relatively big favorite in Morales to getting a nice juicy plus number, plus 250 via decision for Morales. So that's going to be the play from Jordan Sherwood. I love that when you can ever flip those numbers around the way you just did. I do want to get to the first fight of the night because this is interesting seeing Charles Johnson on Twitter. He's excited to get back in there. First fight of the night. He is a small dog here against Rafael Estevam, a guy we haven't seen in a while now. Small favorite here for Rafael. Do you think he's playable? I'm seeing minus $1.35 right now.
I think he is, but I think you've got to wait to see what he looks like Friday. This is the Gamlu special. You got to wait till weigh in to see what this guy looks like because he struggled. He was supposed to make his UFC debut in May. Struggled with weight, didn't get to the cage. So let's see what he looks like. But this is a guy with a lot of notoriety. You know, a champion in Shudo and LFA, respectable promotions outside the UFC, and a guy that just grabs onto you and holds you and grapples you to death. And the one thing that we've seen out of Charles Johnson, look, he's got good cardio. He's got good takedown defense. He'll probably have the stand-up advantage. You know, Estevam is more of a body, utilizing his kicks and stuff, not really going to the head. But Charles Johnson struggles with guys that are kind of like wet blankets and just hold on to you, chain wrestle you, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I like Estevam, because that's his skill set that I've seen that I think is going to pay dividends, at least early on in his UFC career. So that's why I think as a small favorite, I get it. I like it. I'm going to play it, but I'm going to hold off until just to be sure that Estevam gets through the scale, the tough weight cut, and is ready to fight on Saturday afternoon, if you will.
And I think Johnson's going to be a popular dog pick there. So I'm picking up what you're putting down there. You might get pretty good value here with Rafael as a small favorite. I want to get to the welterweight division here with Johnny Parsons against Uros Medic. And Medic right now 9-1, Parsons 9-3. And Uros is a rather large favorite here at minus 230. Should he be that big a fave?
Well, first off, Parsons obviously shocked some people with his victory over Danny Roberts when he go overseas and gets into just a barn burner of a fight and wins. But I think people knew about Parsons, or at least people that are in the know. So I cashed on him as a dog. I think you did as well. But I think this is a fight again, firefight. Someone's lights are going out. Either one guy likes to stand there and trade. Look for a variety of strikes. Medic certainly has got some power in both hands. We've seen him finish people before. Parsons can do the same. That's how he fights like a dog. So I think, not necessarily going to go on either side. I think it might be a little bit of a risk for Parsons because he's got some leaky defense. But I think someone is going to sleep, in this fight. So I actually like the finish in this fight. The under is what I'm going to pay attention to between these two welterweights.
And plus $1.15 right now for the under a round and a half. We got about a minute to go. I want to get to Jonathan Pierce against Joe Anderson Brito here. This has got potential sneaky fight of the night written on it. What do you make of this matchup?
Oh, look, that Brito victory over Diego Lopez holding up pretty well in the Contender Series. But Brito, 3 finishes. I think the outlier is Bill Algeo. That's a concern because Jonathan Pierce kind of fights similarly to Bill Algeo. But then you look at Jonathan Pierce. What happened in that Joe Lozon fight? Was it the UFC jitters? I mean, good for Joe Lozon. We love J-Lo. That was great to see him perform like that. But I just worry about, again, Parsons taking a big shot from Joe Anderson Brito at some point. So I'm certainly on the side right now of Brito. I think he could shock some people and get Pierce out of there in a rather quick fashion. But won't be surprised if Pierce strangles him at some point towards the end of the fight.
Plus $1.10 right now on Brito. So I like how you figured out some plus money on a lot of these fights. Appreciate it as always, Jordan. We'll catch up again very soon. Come on back. First Strike rolls on here on VSiN. We are back here on First Strike. Dave Ross here at Circus Sportsbook in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. What a pleasure to be joined by former 3-time NFL All-Pro linebacker Shawne Merriman, who now runs Lights Out XF MMA. It's great to have the man nicknamed Lights Out back in the program. Shawne, thanks for joining us today. You've got XF12 coming up Saturday, November 18th, Thunder Studio in Long Beach. Tell the people about the promotion and how it's been coming along.
Yeah, Lights Out Extreme Fighting 12. This Saturday in Long Beach, California. If you're in Long Beach, you want to make sure you get there. Get your tickets at lightsoutxf.com. And if you can't make it there, we'll be live on Fubo TV, Fubo Sports. If you don't have Fubo, make sure you get it. But this card is big, man. We got something special coming up. Victor Rojas, as you see right there on the screen, is fighting Woods Jr. Victor's coming up from San Diego. Got Alba Morales on his card, who fought in the UFC for a bit. He's fighting Ramos, who's out of Nick and Nate Diaz camp. So I'm expecting one of those guys to be there at some point. Tommy Aaron is fighting on this card again, who's Tony Ferguson's guy. So we're locked and loaded for this card. So make sure you guys get there in Long Beach this Saturday. And again, we'll be live on Fubo TV, Fubo Sports.
Shawne, it's amazing to see you make the transition, obviously, from your playing days in the NFL now to promoter, owner, operator, and running your own thing here. What's it been like for you doing this? Because I can only think maybe a handful of former athletes that then go on to do something else kind of like this. Oscar De La Hoya being a big-time promoter, obviously, in boxing. How has this been, this transition for you?
Well, it's hectic. It's chaotic. But, again, I've been around this sport for 17 years. And I wouldn't want to do anything else. And more importantly, man, look, we want to give these next up-and-coming guys an opportunity, right? That's what this thing is about. Obviously, a lot of their aspirations is to go to the UFC, have that opportunity to go there. We're going to be a big platform to provide that for them. We're jumping 50 to 60% sometimes, even more than that on Fubo, the viewership. And so people are finding out about us in the country. So, we started out, not a lot of fighters kind of trying to figure out who we were. And now, we're getting calls from all over the country for people coming to fight in Lights Out Extreme Fighting. Yeah,
pretty cool, man. And good on you for doing it and giving these guys a platform, because that's exactly what they need to show their skills. Tell the people what these fights have been like, the atmosphere for them. You mentioned if you can't make it down to Long Beach, you can get it on Fubo Sports. But for that crowd, for people that are in attendance, what have they been seeing on a regular basis?
It's crazy in there. It's intense. It's very intense. We have Ramos is coming down from Northern California, fighting somebody in Southern California, Alba Morales, and that Diaz Army, man. They travel pretty tough. And so last fight we sold out, we had almost 250 people outside. So I had to send someone out there to kind of relay the updates and the results of the fight. So I felt bad for them. So that's why I try to tell people, walk-ups are cool if we have them. More than likely we won't. So get your tickets at lightsoutxf.com.
There it is, everybody. So check it out Saturday, November 18th. Pretty cool stuff what you're doing there. I do want to get your thoughts, because you mentioned you've been around the sport now for almost 2 decades. Obviously goes back into your playing days. When did you get involved with MMA, and was it helpful to you as a football player learning another skill while still an active member and a star in the NFL?
Yeah, no doubt about that. It actually happened between my 2005 and 2006 off season. I was with a good friend of mine, Jay Glazer, over there at Fox Sports. He saw me boxing, which I grew up in PG County, Washington, D.C. area. I grew up boxing. Uncles and were professional boxers. And so I just got in MMA. I wanted to help my hand-eye coordination. He sent me an address. I started training with Randy Couture and all these guys. And I never left the sport since. And look, I try to tell a lot of active players, especially, but even former players, to kind of pick up some kind of combat sports discipline, man. It can really, really help you out a lot.
Yeah, no question about it. And know that area, the neck of the woods very well from my D.C. days. And remember you, obviously, in your Maryland days. And I remember when you were picking this stuff up. And is it interesting now to see more athletes gravitating towards MMA? Would you give them a do and a don't? Like, hey, don't go at it too hard, maybe from the beginning? Or you mentioned the discipline and that aspect that it brings to their careers.
Yeah, just don't go into the wrong gym talking too much. That's what you don't want to do. Because, look, a lot of us got pride, man. We are big, strong, explosive, athletic. But these guys, they've been doing it for a very long time. They're dangerous. They're very skilled. And so it's a humbling experience when you have a big athlete that's explosive, that can do all these things, learning something new and getting your butt kicked once in a while.
Yeah, it's exactly right. You're going to be humbled, certainly the first couple of times you get in that gym. Are you still practicing? Are you still an MMA practitioner?
I am. I still some days now spar once a week. Open mat, whether I'm in LA, Vegas, Texas, Arizona. Most of the guys, a lot of UFC fighters, they'll see me hop on an open mat day and something. If they already don't know me, they'll look at me like, what is Shawne Merriman doing down there? Kind of throwing hands. But I like to work, man, and stay disciplined. It keeps me in shape, gives me something to get up for in the morning. And you know what? If one of these guys don't like their contract, I got to hold my own. So You know.
What are you walking around at these days? What weight class are we putting you in?
Way too damn heavy. We had a look. We had a charity event, a charity flag football event. I played against last night. Played last night for the Chargers for their Chargers Impact Fund. And they put Deshaun Jackson at quarterback. And I had to chase him around. I'm going to be sore for the next 3 days. So those days are done.
Yeah, you can't be chasing around the Deshaun Jacksons of the world. He's too fast these days. You mentioned, certainly, I got to ask you about UFC 295, your takeaways from what you saw in Madison Square Garden. We've got a new interim heavyweight champion now in Tom Aspinall, and we got a two-time champion now in Alex Pereira. What was your biggest takeaway from either of those two, the co-main and the main event?
Pereira, man, he's scary as hell. You know, and look, the fights against Izzy, man, for him to kind of bounce back, because when you get knocked out in that caliber, you kind of lose a lot of your confidence. You start doubting yourself a little bit, and this guy's just a damn machine, man. So I'm happy for him. I think that every time the UFC, I've been to two of their fights, two or three of their fights in Madison Square Garden, and they just turn that place out, man. It's a different atmosphere when you get there.
It really is. And now we kind of play that waiting game now with Tom Aspinall as the interim heavyweight champion. We don't know if it's going to be John Jones next year in 2024. How do you, for a guy with your perspective, because you hear these debates in all kinds of sports, well, let me tell you about this guy in my day was better than your guy this day. John is kind of that guy that's gone to both worlds because he's regarded as the greatest mixed martial arts practitioner. And yet some are saying now that Aspinall is the next, and maybe that's a bad matchup for John. A fully healthy John Jones, you know, north of 40 now, would you make him a betting underdog against Tom Aspinall?
No, and it's like, you know, when people bet against the Chiefs, right? How are you going to bet against the defending champ? And they're the ones with the title. How do you bet against them? Now, you know, Dominic Reyes was the closest guy that we've seen ever probably give John Jones a problem. And we haven't seen anybody else. John Jones has walked for everyone else. So until you show me someone else that's going to do what John Jones has done, he is the greatest MMA fighter of all time. And I don't think that should be a question to anybody.
I'm with you on that. And the other part that I absolutely loved after UFC 295 is when Pereira won, he called out Izzy again, even though Israel's out of sign. He says, I'm taking some time away from the sport. He's not even the middleweight champion anymore. And yet Pereira still wants one more shot at that. Do you want to see that as a fight fan, Shawne Merriman, see those two guys? I don't care what the weight class is. Go at it one more time. I
do. And you know what? I couldn't understand that anything but come to daddy. When he said come to daddy, I got that part of it. So, look, it'll be a great fight, great matchup. I think that trilogy, or however you want to call it after that, will be around for a long time.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't care what weight they happen to fight at. If that's who he wants, and Izzy's been back on him on social media and the like, we'll see if that fight happens. Very quickly, NFL, do you miss the playing days? You still watching either the Chargers or the Bills or any of your former guys?
Every Sunday, every Monday night, every Thursday night football, I'm locked in. And you know, for me, man, it's kind of being away from the game, former guys. So you start to become a fan of the pass rushers. You know, I love watching guys like Fred Warner and Nick Bosa, you know, Joey Bosa. I mean, Micah Parsons. You become a fan the further away you step away from the game.
Yeah, exactly. You still appreciate certainly good linebacker play that you're seeing from some of those guys that you mentioned. Okay, we got to wrap it up. Got about 45 seconds to go. But once again, Lights Out XF12, Saturday, November 18th, Thunder Studio in Long Beach. Tell the people again how they can access it if they can't get there in person.
Yep, if you can get there, lightsoutxf.com, where you get your tickets. If you can't, we'll be live on Fubo TV, Fubo Sports. If you guys don't have Fubo, make sure you get it. This one is our biggest card, but I tell you what, man, we got a couple guys who I think was going to move on to the UFC after they're done with Lights Out. So it'll be nice. And
there it is. Again, it's the proving ground, and all of a sudden, sometimes you can go from that level and keep on ascending up. Lights Out. Shawne Merriman, it's great to catch up with you, man. Appreciate everything that you're doing and continued success with Lights Out XF. We appreciate it.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me.
There it is, everybody. Shawne Merriman, 3-time NFL All-Pro linebacker. All right, much more to get to. Don't go anywhere. It is First Strike right here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We continue First Strike by going to our nation's capital right now to catch up with Reed Kuhn. You can follow him on X as I do at Fightnomics. He's the author of a book of the same name. Reed, it's been a wild weekend since UFC 295. 2 new champions now, an interim heavyweight champion and a light heavyweight champion. But for those who missed it, like yours truly, what was the menu that you had for fight night at UFC 295? Because in the break, it sounded decadent.
I am returning to my roots, full steakhouse mode for a big pay-per-view card at MSG. You got to go big, New York style steak, filet mignon, all the trimmings, very good wine pairing. So yeah, I went all out. It was a small audience, so I was able to put a lot into the menu. Next time when I'm cooking for a lot of people, I can't quite go that well on the plating.
Mom is going to just love this when she hears this because she always looks forward to that. And her son cannot cook like you can cook. I'll just leave it at that. Also, we always talk about, obviously, how you got to Fightnomics and becoming the author of the book and kind of inventing, if you will, the tale of the tape that we use a lot in MMA. And I want to talk about something that you've kind of greenlighted recently, and this is with MMA odds breakers as well, where people can actually practice kind of what you do and kind of create some of their own models. Can you tell the people how to do that?
Yeah, you're probably familiar with Nick Kalikas, who founded MMA Oddsbreaker. He's an old school MMA odds guy, betting expert, and is still in the game. So my Uber tapes have been showing up on his website for years now for paying customers to go behind a paywall to get those. But we decided to automate that, and working with Nate Latshaw, who is also on Twitter, Nate Latshaw. He's been tweeting a lot of statistics that he built after reading the book Fightnomics to sort of automate this, so he gets the latest stats after every card. He updates fighter metrics. And now you can go to that website and basically pick any 2 fighters and create your own Uber tale of the tape, or you see a preview for each of the next 2 weeks of matchups. So as of right now, you can go in and see who are the matchups this weekend, see how they stack up. You've got comparison to an average for that division, which helps you put some of these numbers into context, some of the more nuanced numbers. So hopefully it's a nice tool that people can bookmark and come back to and use that as a research tool.
Absolutely fascinating. Again, Nick Kalikas is one of the OGs here of First Strike. You can follow him at Fight Odds. Whenever you and Nick are doing something together, I know it's going to be very successful. So looking forward to that. And again, everybody, that's a tool that you can use, as Reed's given it there to use, to try to increase your knowledge in the fight game, certainly from a gambling perspective. So let's get right to that. And let's get to the main event this week with Brendan Allen against Paul Craig. Craig's one of those guys that's kind of fluctuated in weight back down to 185. He's fought up at 205, where he was kind of thought to be a little bit too small for that division. Brendan Allen feels like he's coming into his own right now, 27. I know the numbers normally going to favor the younger guy, 8 years, the junior of Paul Craig, but did the numbers support that Allen should be over a $4 betting favorite?
Yeah, price here is going to matter. Yes, the numbers do favor the younger guy in this matchup. Paul Craig, he is 36, but I think it feels like he's been around longer. He's been in some crazy wars. I mean, if you go back to Shogun Rua, he had a crazy fight with that guy. And so it's a weathered 36. He's been around for a while and taken some damage. And Brendan Allen is the new blood, but Brendan Allen succeeded primarily through his grappling. He'll point strike for a while, but it's really his submission game that's been finishing fights. And when you think about what is the number one thing that you don't want to do with Paul Craig, it's go on the ground with him. And so that's why I feel like things are stacked up for Brendan Allen to get another marquee victory in a main event. But there is that wild card. So at what price do you back off and maybe take a flyer on Paul Craig to spoil the show with a finish? Now, that's the key. I think prop bets are the way to go on this one, because straight up, I'm not seeing much value in 4-1 for Brendan Allen.
And there it is. 5-1 is the prop number for sub for Paul Craig. Now, again, if this fight does go down to the ground, as you alluded to with Brendan Allen, because that is normally what he likes to do, maybe a club and sub happens. Paul Craig has done that before as well. 9-1 there. Is that because you see the prop price at 5-1 obviously increased from the plus 330 of just picking the Craig side? Would it only be sub or pass for you if you like the dog here?
With Craig, he does have striking finishes also on the ground. It's one of those scenarios you might want to go ITD or just put a limit on it, under 2.5. If Craig is going to pull off the upset, it's probably going to be sooner rather than later. With Brendan Allen, if he chooses not to take this to the ground and he chooses to point strike, he is favorably positioned here. He does have much better accuracy. He does have some power, and Craig probably doesn't want to stand and take punches for a while. The problem with Allen is that he also has very bad defense.
Mm.
So he gets hit, and all of a sudden, Paul Craig, with all the intensity that he brings into the cage, he likes to swing for the fences. When he does swing, he may not be very accurate, but you also don't want to get hit by a former light heavyweight that way. So there's a lot of wild cards here. I think if I am going the Paul Craig route, especially if there's more price inflation as the week goes on, I think it would be a Craig inside the distance play just for a small bit, because you're going to get a very good return on that. Otherwise, if you're one of those parlay hunters, you want to play it safe. Brendan Allen is still the safe pick. I just don't know if I want to pay 4-1 for him.
Plus 370 right now if you like Paul Craig inside the distance. By the way, it's reverse for Brendan Allen. You're not getting that much better value win by finishes. You got to still lay $3 for Brendan Allen to finish via decision. Now, if you want to get the sneaky prop way there, KO, TKO, or DQ, you can get plus money on Brendan Allen at plus $1.25. Sub is plus 225, but you're playing that guessing game there if that fight does hit the ground. I'm interested what the models show when you have a young fighter like Michael Morales, who's been nothing but impressive every time we've seen him in the octagon here, still undefeated, against a guy like Jake Matthews, who I think we've expected maybe a little bit more so far in his career. It's been flashy at times, been disappointing at others. Morales now laying 285 here. Comeback on Jake is plus 230. Any value in the dog according to the numbers?
I'm not seeing it currently, but you called out the important thing, which is we don't know a whole lot about Michael Morales, and the fights he's had so far were so impressive that it's almost like looking back at last week when we had Tom Aspinall in there, and you just don't have a big sample size, but the numbers are amazing. And so it's a question of, do you believe it? And right now, I would go with Michael Morales. I do see him as having the more impressive numbers. He's also bigger and rangier. And you're right about Jake Matthews. I mean, I was a big supporter of him early on, but he's been pretty hit or miss lately, kind of a 500 fighter over the last couple of years. And so I think this is a favorable matchup for Morales, whose striking metrics are kind of insane at the moment. That's probably going to even out after he spends a round or two with Jake Matthews. I don't think Jake Matthews goes down quickly, but even for a young guy at 29, Jake Matthews has been dropped 4 times. And in a shootout, he might be at risk here. And so, yeah, the price isn't so crazy that I can't believe the numbers. If we were getting into the steam category 4-1 with Morales, I would probably back off and say, I just don't see enough that I can believe yet. But right now, he is looking pretty amazing. And at minus 250, I'll go with the favorite here.
You know, I look at Chase Hooper, and he's a fascinating fighter to watch kind of grow up before our MMA eyes, right? We've seen this before with other fighters, and Hooper's now falling in that category here. And it's odd because sometimes he's a big fave, sometimes he feels like a big dog. Now he's back to being over a $2 favorite against the Monkey King in Jordan Levitt, who is as unorthodox as they come, but yet he can surprise sometimes, I think, when people start to count him out. Is this a live dog scenario, or should the youngster, now 24, be over a $2 betting favorite?
This one, it's currently a pass, I think, and that's only because the price came down quite a bit from where it opened. I was seeing some early value on Levitt, and I'm gonna have to wait, I think, later in the week and see where things land. But you're right, Hooper looks good on paper. Terrible defense, but pretty good offense. He's gotten by with his ground game, but so is Jordan Levitt. Jordan Levitt is actually the more eager wrestler of the two, and arguably has some better control metrics. Maybe not in the submissions, but in terms of pure wrestling. And so that's why I'm leaning towards Levitt here for the upset, but just barely. I do want to see where the price lands. But that's because I think he's flying under the radar a little bit. It seems like maybe the market picked up on some of that earlier this week and started throwing down on the underdog. That's the one I'm going to keep close tabs on.
You know, with so many fighters making their debut, just kind of a rule of thumb, you guys are not going to, when you're running the numbers for, you might have other, other establishments that they've been fighting in and other programs. But once I get to the UFC, you're going to discount the old numbers until you see it in the UFC, correct?
That's right. We need at least 3 appearances in the UFC. I am not even including Dana White Contender Series. Depending on the website, if you're on UFC stats, you might see those stats in there included. So I think other analysts that are out there scraping the internet, they might be bucketing that in. I personally exclude that. I just see it as fundamentally a different platform. And that's just how we've done it in the past. When we had Strikeforce and WEC coming over, we had to use some of that data for a brief period of time just to get enough critical mass. Now it's purely UFC fights only.
And really, that shows discipline too, right? That look, you've got a system that's been very profitable. It works that way. We're not going to, just because you see them on Contender Series now, they get to this stage, we're not going to upset the model, correct? We're going to stay with what the model is.
That's right. You want confidence more than anything else. It's okay to be wrong as long as in the long run you're being right more often than not and finding price value. But yeah, you got to have a clean system, a nice algorithm, and stick with what works.
And Reed Kuhn's system is right much more than it is wrong. Reed, appreciate you as always, my friend. Enjoy the fights this week. That's going to do it for this edition of First Strike. We'll see you after the holiday right back here on VSiN.